Alright, I hope everybody's doing good today, having a good day. Today I thought I'd compare the Retron 3 and the FC Twin. Now, both of these are clone consoles and offer multiple systems. But just in case you're deciding between these two, I was just going to go through some differences. Alright, well, let's start with the Retron 3. Alright, I've been wanting to get the Retron 3 for a while. Not necessarily just to leave hooked up to my system, but just to have in the closet and just to have, just in case I wanted to hook this up to a single television. You can play Super Nintendo, Genesis, and NES games, and the compatibility is pretty good for all three of them. But I'm not going to go into compatibility. I'm going to go into just picture and controls. Now, I got this yesterday. I bought it yesterday for $15, which is kind of high for a yard sale, but you know, I wanted to get it because I've been looking for this for a while, and I didn't want to pay the retail price for this. Upside to my purchase was that I got it for $15, which is cheap, but the downside was they didn't have the original controllers that come with it, but I've heard those are really crappy, and I'd much rather use the original controllers for the console, which is the big selling point to me for this, because you can use the NES, Super Nintendo, and the Genesis controllers with the system they were meant to play with. But, and I did not know this, let's say you had a Super Nintendo controller in here, you couldn't play a Genesis or a NES game with it. You have to play the Super Nintendo with the Super Nintendo controller. And the same way with the NES and the Genesis. So that was a downside, actually, not being able to play, like, let's just say that I had my Super Nintendo controllers plugged in here all the time. I couldn't play the NES and I couldn't play the Genesis. I'd have to plug them in each time. And if you're having this sitting on the shelf next to your TV, you're either going to have the controllers plugged up all the time, which is going to be ugly if you're going to use all three systems, or you're just going to have to leave it like this and plug in the controller each time you want to play. Of course, there's this dial to select which system you're playing. And another advantage of this one, if you're strictly going with composite and S-Video, if you're using older technology, it's got S-Video, and the S-Video is really good for the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, but the Nintendo NES, it just does not work. It does not actually put out a S-Video signal. You'll get a very bad picture if you try using the S-Video with the NES. So you have to stick with the Genesis and the Super Nintendo if you're going to leave it hooked up with just strictly this S-Video and the audio. Of course, there's a Japan and then the O switch here, region. Alright, so that was the Retron 3. So let me show you the FC Twin. Now this is my FC Twin. It's actually in rough shape because, of course, I got it secondhand. I actually got this off of eBay. Of course, the FC Twin, the downside to having the FC Twin versus the Retron 3 is the ability to play only Super Nintendo and NES games. The Retron 3 will let you play Genesis games. And the other downside to this is that you can only play Super Nintendo style controllers. And again, I don't have the original controllers that come with the FC Twin, but they're basically shaped like the Super Nintendo controller, and I've heard they're pretty good. But I always use my Super Nintendo controllers because that's the only way to play this. Another downside to this is this FC Twin is only a composite out. There's no S-video. So that's another downside to this system. But what it does do, it actually does very well. It plays Super Nintendo games and NES games, and they actually look pretty good. So let's get into some gameplay and show you some gameplay from both systems. Okay, now so this is the Retron 3 playing Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers on the NES. I'm just going to go ahead and start playing this. Okay, it plays okay. Like I said, I can only use the NES controller. I can also use the controllers that came with the Retron 3, but unfortunately I don't have it. But I've heard those are pretty crappy. The gameplay's pretty good. I do notice that the reds are awfully vivid. Actually, they look too vivid to me. That may be just me. Anyway, that's Rescue Rangers on the Retron 3. Let's look at it on the FC Twin. Okay, this is Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers for the NES on the FC Twin. Now, this is just composite. Now, right away, I noticed that the reds are a lot better on the SE Twin for the NES. It looks a lot better, and this is actually true on whether you use an LCD TV, which I'm using here, and a regular tube TV. And in fact, on the tube TV, it's worse for the Retron 3 in playing NES games. The colors just look bad. So, for playing NES games, I give the nod to the FC Twin. So, also, I'm not even going to go into the S-video for the Retron 3 because it just doesn't put out an S-video. In fact, it's not even meant to do that. Anyway, on to the Sega Genesis on the Retron 3. Okay, here we have Sega Genesis on the Retron 3 playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Alright. The colors on this one are not too bad, and I've also played it on the Tube TV, and actually, it looks better on the Tube TV because the Tube TV was meant to play this. The colors are good. It's nice and clear, and it plays just fine. So, there you go. Let's take a look at it with S-video. Okay, and as you can see, The S-video output is much more vivid on the LCD TV. And it's actually a lot better on the Tube TV if you have S-video on your Tube TV. So, I would say if you were just playing this for the Genesis, now this is much better. Of course, the FC Twin doesn't even have the Genesis, but this really looks good with the S-video. And I'm going to show you in a minute the Super Nintendo output for the S-video. But first, I'm going to show you the Super Nintendo in composite for the Retron 3. Okay, so this is super high impact for the Super Nintendo on the Retron 3 composite. Now this game actually takes a little bit to boot up because you got to go through all these screens. Plays it just fine. Let me adjust this for a second. Okay, so this is super high impact for the Super Nintendo on the Retron 3 with composite output. I love this game. if you want a funny football game, this is cool. But as you can see, it looks pretty good on the composite. So let's just get some gameplay. I love this. Okay, so let's just pick a play. It looks pretty good. The reds are not too bad. Incomplete. Okay. Your toast. Blue 47. Your toast. Alright, so let me show you the S-video. So this is S-video from the Retron 3 playing super high impact. And it looks very good. And now, it's super high impact. The colors are bright, it's vivid, and it plays fine. Hot blue, 47, 51. First down. All right. Let's show you on the FC Twin component. Okay, so this is composite on the FC Twin. Of course, the FC Twin only outputs composite. Gotta sit through all these screens here. Okay, so the composite is not too bad for the Super Nintendo FC Twin. Of course, the S-video from the Retron 3 is much better. I suck at that. But you know, this is pretty good.
Yeah, so what?
Oh my goodness, I played this a lot in college with a very good friend. So,
51.
so let's just go over the differences between the two systems. Okay, one thing to go over with both of these actually is both of these are hardware clones. Um, they're not using software emulation to emulate the games like the Retron 5 would, or the new Retron 77. It's actually a clone that uses software emulation to run 2600 games, which I think is a travesty. I just wish that they would do a hardware clone where you could run your cartridges. But anyway, so if you're looking at either of these two, the one thing that stands out for the Retron 3 is that the Retron 3 does play Genesis games, which the FC Twin does not. But let's just say that you just want to play Nintendo games, like you want to play the NES and the Super Nintendo. It depends. Like this one, the Retron 3 plays Super Nintendo games really well. But Nintendo games, NES games, the colors just look horrible in composite. And of course, it doesn't even output a proper S-video signal for the NES. But the S-video on both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo look great for the Retron 3. So if you're going to play Genesis games and Super Nintendo games on S-video, this would be the one to get, unless you don't like having to use the controller that comes with it, or switching out controllers, because you cannot use a Super Nintendo controller on a Sega Genesis game. I wish you could, but on this one at least, this one that I have, you can't. Also, the Nintendo on the Retron 3, I just think it's terrible. FC Twin's not bad. Of course, you can only use the Super Nintendo style controllers, but I'll tell you what, that's not a bad situation. So if you just want to play Super Nintendo, NES on a composite, this is not bad. Especially if you could use a tube TV. Another thing I wanted to go over is, and this is really a pet peeve of mine with these clone consoles, is the cartridge slots. The grip on the cartridge slots for the Retron 3 is just too tight. Especially on this one, it's the Genesis and the NES. But I've heard several people say that Super Nintendo grip on theirs is tight. So these have a tight grip. The SC Twin, it's kind of tight, but it's not as tight as this one. So to round up, it just depends on your situation and what you want to do. S-Video for Genesis and Super Nintendo, this is great. Just plain composite for Nintendo and Super Nintendo, this is great. So you'll have to decide upon yourself which is more important. And playing the original controllers is big, but for the Nintendo, you actually sacrifice some quality of video output versus the YOLO FC Twin. My personal favorite, I really can't nail it down because it just depends. If I'm hooking up to S-Video and only playing Genesis and Super Nintendo, right here. Of course, this is the only one that will play Genesis. So, just depending on your situation. And if you have all of the controllers for the Retron 3. Yovo, you only have to have Super Nintendo style controllers. Of course, you could play the awful infrared controllers that come with the Retron 3, but they're Sega Genesis style, which is not bad. But you have to be standing directly in front of it. It's because it's an RF signal, kind of like a remote control. But if you're not going to use those controllers, you got to use the controllers for each system. You can't swap between each system and play, like say the Genesis with your Super Nintendo controller. You just can't. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you have a great day.